Hello. During the first two semesters of my Biology 2 class, one of the more impactful works that we've studied is by Lucy Bivens and Jaak Panksepp, and it's a work called The Archaeology of Mind. Panksepp is most well known for his work on affective neuroscience, in the book he titled Affective Neuroscience. Most famous also for discovering play circuits in mammalian brain systems, specifically working with rats. Panksepp learned that rats laughed, and in learning that, he discovered an entire circuitry that, in his mind, in his work, he points to that all mammals share. So this work has been very influential to the first two groups of students who have taken this class. So there are some difficulties with this. One, this book I own on my iPad, and I can't readily get reading to the students. So hopefully I'm going to read some chapters into this channel, and you're going to be able to listen to some of the words, and we'll talk about some of the concepts. But mostly I'm just going to read. I'm just going to read from parts of each chapter, and then hopefully show some images, and then I'll have this material for my students to talk with in class. So again, this is The Archaeology of the Mind, the Neoevolutionary Origins of Human Emotion by Lucy Bivens and Dr. Jaak Panksepp. Chapter 1 is entitled Ancestral Passions, and it begins with a quote from Darwin, and then we'll jump in. Certain actions which we recognize as expressive of certain states of mind are the direct result of the constitution of the nervous system, and have been from the first independent of the will, and to a large extent of habit. Our present subject is very obscure, but from its importance must be discussed at some length, and it is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. This book takes us on an archaeological dig into the recesses of the mammalian brain, to the ancestral sources of our emotional minds. To the best of our knowledge, the basic biological values of all mammalian brains were built upon the same basic plan, laid out in consciousness-creating affective circuits that are concentrated in the subcortical regions far below the neocortical thinking cap that is so highly developed in humans. Mental life would be impossible without this foundation. There, among the ancestral networks that we share with other mammals, a few ounces of brain tissue constitute the bedrock of our emotional lives, generating the many primal ways in which we can feel emotionally good or bad within ourselves. As we mature and learn about ourselves and the world in which we live, these systems provide a solid foundation for further mental developments. These subcortical brain networks are quite similar in all mammals, but they are not identical in all details. This similarity extends even to certain species of birds that, for instance, also have separation distress panic networks and a grief system, as we will label it here, one of the main sources of psychological pain within their brains and ours. So I'm just going to stop right here and let you know kind of one of the more important things in this book. Here's a picture of the text. And even just this slide, which is the slide that I've used in lectures over the past 2 years, 2 semesters, has had a profound impact on our students. And so when I mentioned earlier the panic and grief system that Panksepp talks about in species of birds, notice that, or you would notice that if you were reading the text, or if you get the text and read along, that all of these systems are all capitalized. Okay, and that's one of the things throughout this text that keeps coming up, that these are the 7 things that, again, the word affective, okay, so we're talking about verbs, okay, we're talking about impacts, we're talking about actions, we're talking about where you don't have to really know, you don't really have to be able to articulate with words what's going on. You feel these things, in a sense. That these things all mammals share, and that they are powerful enough to be in all capitalized throughout this scientific work. He'll get into why he capitalizes them in a minute, but I just wanted to let you know on the forefront that that's what happens. Continuing on. We mammals and birds share many other basic emotional systems, and some even seem to exist in cold-blooded reptiles, but less is known about them. Thus, across many species of warm-blooded vertebrates, a variety of basic emotional networks are anatomically situated in similar brain regions, and these networks serve remarkably similar functions. We will discuss the nature of these brain systems that are being revealed by research on other animals, henceforth just animals. This knowledge is beginning to inform us about the deeper aspects of human nature. It provides a scientifically based visions about the origins of mind. As briefly mentioned in the preface, the ancient subcortical regions of mammalian brains consist of at least 7 emotional or affective systems. So in this, he wants to use the term affective to get away from the term emotional, because the emotional is, people are emotional about it. So he's talking about affective systems to hopefully remove the subjectivity to some degree of the word emotional, but he's talking about the same things. 7, and he says at least as well, at least 7 emotional or affective systems. Seeking, also known as expectancy; fear, also known as anxiety; rage, also anger; lust, or sexual excitement; care, or nurturance; panic grief, or sadness; and play, which is social joy. Each of these systems controls distinct but specific types of behaviors associated with many overlapping physiological changes. To the best of our knowledge, these systems also generate distinct types of affective consciousness, and some of the most compelling data for that comes from humans. As we will see, when these systems are stimulated in humans, people always experience intense emotional feelings, and presumably when these systems are normally activated by life events, they generate abundant memories and thoughts for people about what is happening to them. The triangular approach of affective neuroscience, discussed later in this chapter, provides an opportunity to assemble the needed evidence for these systems' effects, with an E. But to proceed effectively, we need a new language to describe the emotional systems of the brain in order to match our emerging understanding of these primary process psychological powers. This is why we capitalize the name of the affective systems. Vernacular usage handed down from folk psychology can create misunderstanding of these primary process powerhouses of mind. The capitalization indicate that real physical and distinct networks for various emotions do exist in mammalian brains. So then he gets into the hemispheric structure of the brain and where these figures, where these brain systems lie. And we'll look at that at another time. I do want to just continue with the reading. So, as far as we know right now, primal emotional systems are made up of neuroanatomies and neurochemistries that are remarkably similar across all mammalian species. This suggests that these systems evolved a very long time ago, and that at a basic emotional and motivational level, all mammals are more similar than they are different. Deep in the ancient affective recesses of our brains, we remain evolutionarily kin. This has long been evident in our body structure and biochemistries. The same types of neural paths and brain chemicals that arouse each of these 7 emotional mediating systems are found within various mammals. And according to current evidence, both humans and other mammals experience similar feelings when these systems are activated. Of course, these feelings cannot be identical, and we should not expect them to be. Evolution always adds diversity to shared general principles that, despite evolutionary diversification, provide the bridge for translating key issues from one species to many others. Many discoveries in modern medicine have been based on animal models using the same reasoning. As we noted in the preface, these affective substrates are archaeological treasures, multifaceted jewels of the mind that embody our capacity for affective experience, a capacity that we still share with our animal cousins. However, as humans, we have higher brain expansions that allow us to think deeply about our nature as well as about our options to live more cerebrally, culturally, and creatively. We can bite our tongues when we are angry and not say things that make matters worse. But many choose not to. We use scare quotes in the previous sentence for many people, their emotions are not under the willful control of the higher mind. Indeed, there are reasons to believe that our neocortical functions were substantially programmed by our lower mind in conjunction with our early reading, leading to blessed lives or to those full of misery. And as Panksepp is building this case now, and Bivens, what they're trying to do is establish a separation between what we experience cognitively and what we experience affectively. And kind of when we go back and you look at these affective systems that he's trying to present, or the authors are trying to present, they're showing specific key emotional outputs that all mammals share. And so what they're trying to make the distinction between is these affective systems and then the cognitive sections of our mind that we think with, if that makes any sense. These cognitive structures that allow us the ability to ponder and wonder and make decisions. That there's a distinction between these two, and to understand them and to understand their differentiation can kind of help you. A couple of things here at the bottom of this slide. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this picture for a moment. Panksepp presents this at the bottom of the image. A major goal of psychotherapy is to promote cognitive control of the affective process, or affective processes. So now you're into psychotherapy. Now you're into a part of psychology. You could consider a little bit more the depth psychology world, the world of Freud, the world of Jung, the world of Adler. People who were psychologists who were looking at ways of explaining emotion and psychology based on this depth of experience, and these affective systems that he put in all capital letters. Again, one of the things I want to point out is that there's an action to perception relationship, where the action is primary. The emotion, the bodily feeling, the way that you're moved, the action is primary to the perception. Now, in cognitive modes of thought or types of consciousness that Panksepp used, he talks about that perception, that there's perception to action, that you perceive something more forthrightly, more in your mind, and then you go do it. And the same thing with this term action. Here there are intentions in action, whereas in cognitive structures there's intentions to act, and you're planned out. Whereas the affective are more so the actual emotional response. Interesting that Darwin terms, the Darwin quote at the beginning, kind of goes back to this. Goes back to the nervous system, and one of the key things he wants to mention is our nervous system. And so at this point, when Darwin's writing this, the power of the nervous system, is well known, and just how much of a miraculous, evolutionary force the nervous system is. But again, when you read what Darwin wrote or what Panksepp used at the beginning, when he talks about the nervous system and certain states of mind being the direct result of the constitution of the nervous system. And so Darwin was pointing out that we embody responses from our nervous system sensing what is going on around us, and that is what in a sense we are more evolved for. We've been doing that with our nervous system, and this is kind of what the point of Panksepp's work is with the affective systems, connecting them to mammals. Is as long as there has been mammals, we have evolved to do things this way, for whatever reasons, to survive and reproduce, being the Darwinian narrative mostly. So those things I wanted to be able to point out before we moved on. Sorry, I had to move my place. Because of our higher brain expansions, we experience life at a cognitive levels that other animals cannot imagine. We can reflect on our options in subtle ways, leading to even more subtle feelings constructed largely through learning. Our unique minds in this world and the cosmos arise from the cognitive riches of our higher neocortical expansions. But all the while, our higher minds remain rooted in our ancestral past. It is understandable that many wish to envision our affective lives as being completely intertwined with our cognitive abilities, but from a neuroevolutionary perspective, that is not correct. Although many cognitive scientists and philosophers prefer to think that our unique cerebral abilities about our unique cerebral abilities, that does not serve our understandings of the origin of mind at all. But it is fascinating to think about those tertiary aspects of mind. At that level, we have full complexity of all levels of interacting, allowing us to even dwell on our own mortality with existential dread, or to have feelings sublime. It is unlikely that other animals experience their mind with such neuroaffective angst and appreciative depth. But they surely experience their primal emotions, and surely some other levels of that are much harder to understand. Here, our concern is to go to the deepest roots of the human mind through an appreciation of the minds of other creatures. Although neuroscientists have long known much about the ancient emotional circuits of our brain, these circuits have only recently been definitively linked to our emotional feelings. This allows neuroscientists to delve deeply into the neural substrates of the affect, the menagerie of our basic internally generated feelings. Which brain systems bring us joy? Why are we sometimes sad? Why at times are some people always sad? How do we experience enthusiasm? What fills us with lust, anger, fear, and tenderness? The traditional behavioral and cognitive scientists cannot provide satisfactory answers to such profound issues, and not simply because researchers have failed to ask such questions. Affective neuroscience has made a fresh start by proceeding from the bottom up without de-engenerating our unique human abilities. And it is offering both a new vision of mental origins and new data to back up such assertions. Affective neuroscience seeks to link the affective mind of animal brains to triangulate among subjective mental states, most easily studied in humans, brain functions more easily studied in animals, and the natural, instinctual, emotional behaviors that all mammals must exhibit early in life to survive. This triangulation allows us to envision the ancient ground plan for human mental life and the deep neural sources of our values, our primal emotional feelings. This knowledge points us toward brain functions we must study in order to understand emotional disorder, the various psychiatric syndromes that cause mental chaos in both human and animal lives. But maturational experiences soon supplement those evolved tools with abundant thoughts and learning, making the overall picture very complex. However, we plan to remain as much as possible at the primary process level of analysis. This is not only because that level has been neglected by those who study psychology, philosophy, and the humanities. The analysis of the unconscious secondary process is already a robust, well-established branch of the behavioral neuroscience. Just think fear conditioning, which we'll dwell upon in chapters 5 and 6. We will neglect the many higher order tertiary processes, aspects of the human mind, but we will argue that those mental luxuries were grounded on a most thorough understanding of the foundational issues. The reason we have not achieved that understanding is because these issues can only be well clarified through animal brain research. And for a century now, there has been very little discussion and research on how mind emerges in animal brains. Many researchers still claim that animals are mindless zombies with no comparable brain-mind organization that clearly leads in humans to a sense of self. There are surely many scholars who might disagree with the above strategy. We want to avoid convoluted scholarly debate, but we do need to give readers a flavor of the way in which many scientists with vested interest in the field might respond to our position. We will do this generically without pointing at anyone specific who is still alive. Readers who are interested in pursuing the details of the diverse versions of the field may consult other publications by Jaak Panksepp, who has engaged with these issues many times. An excellent additional reading highlighting the many views there is contained in The Nature of Emotions, edited by Ekman and Davidson in 1994. All right, that's a good place. That's a good place to stop. Just for the last little bit, we'll talk about levels of control in brain, emotional, and affective systems. These primary process, the basic primordial affects Panksepp produces as primary that he was speaking about. These are what goes on in the subneocortical systems of the brain, so kind of the deeper brain areas connected to the hypothalamus. I mean, we're talking about some basic pieces of brain structure. The first are emotional affects, where your intentions are in actions. An example of that, my dog, who she's fixed. She's a German short-haired pointer. When she's cranked up on a day when she's coming back inside, one of the things that she does is she sprints. She sprints and she jumps on her bed, which is at the front of the house, and she sprints all the way through the kitchen, all the way through the dining room, jumps on her bed, and she starts to hump it. And it's funny, and it's kind of interesting when she does it. But I don't have to ask what her intentions are. There are intentions in her action, and that's, as crude of a way as I can give you emotional affects. Second are homeostatic affects. These are brain-body interceptors. These are things like hunger and thirst, and you can think of the Snickers commercials where all the time, you're not you when you're hungry. So kind of even advertisers know that this is an emotional draw. Everybody can grasp what it's like to be hangry. Hungry, eat a Snickers. And so there's Snickers advertising team, marketing team, kind of pulling at our primary process, basic primordial affects, emotions. The third primary process or sensory affect. These are sensory triggered pleasurable and unpleasurable, disgusting feelings. And that's something to keep in mind. Those pleasurable, unpleasurable, and disgust are when you feel those emotions, right? When you feel those affects, they're sensory. Your body is sensing something that drives this emotion, and so for those people who get upset, and this is something that gets to me at times, when another person has a reaction like that, that reaction is theirs. It's deeper than just an understanding of you. If you're offended by somebody's sensory affect being, to use the safe space term, triggered, it's not like they really are in control of that. These are primary process. Again, read the term, basic primordial affects. Primordial, just means old. Not really in control of it. The second thing we'll look at is the secondary process emotions. This is learning vis-a the basal ganglia. And so the second parts of emotion, these are secondary process emotions. Classical conditioning. This is the one where this is the one where you can kind of see learning because of classical conditioning, and fear response was one of those operant conditioning that Panksepp was talking about in the earlier parts of the reading. One example I'll give from film of classical conditioning or the fear conditioning is in one of the Harry Potter movies. I guess the last Harry Potter movie, when they're down at Gringotts and they have the dragon at the bottom who's supposed to protect all the vaults, and they have classically conditioned, use fear conditioning to ring the bell and make the dragon experience pain. So and now I'm drawing on another emotional heartstring now, which is behavioral and emotional. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. The second is instrumental and operant conditioning. This is where the seeking system comes in. So at the top of these affective systems, you see the term seeking, and this system is the most interesting. No, it's not the most interesting. They're all interesting, but again, this one makes you want to search further and more. It seems to be the most powerful. It seems to be the one that kind of you want ticking, and you want to be paying attention to, as much as you possibly can. The third one is behavioral and emotional habits. These are kind of your tics. These are kind of your, if you're watching the Vervaeke series, this is kind of where you would get into what he calls parasitic processing, and the connections between the cognitive and the affective are not as such to where they're updating, but they're just kind of doing the same things over and over and over and over again. Finally, tertiary affects or neocortical awareness functions. These are where you're getting into the higher brain areas that we think of as mind. And then I don't, earlier through those first two, primary and secondary, most of that people would still refer to as brain. But now these are kind of where humans make their separation, or start to make their separation because of our expanded frontal cortex. Cognitive executive functions, thoughts, planning, looking ahead, emotional ruminations and regulations. Okay, this is kind of where you kind of put yourself and say, I'm not going here. Or memory of emotions. So when you're putting that's an awareness function. That's a function that's also operated out of your frontal cortex. And then finally, in quotations, to kind of end our discussion, is the free will, higher working memory functions. And he put free will in quotation marks, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. I don't know that it's one of the things where he's calling free will an illusion here. Doesn't really matter. One thing to kind of bring that back, and to end the to talk with. Part of the reason we're teaching this biology 2 class, or this sociobiology of evolutionary psychology class, is because of E.O. Wilson. And E.O. Wilson's work in sociobiology pointed to many different things that have helped further our understanding of human emotional development, further than lots of psychologists ever thought we would be able to go. In his book Consilience, though, E.O. Wilson is talking about free will, and he goes through this brain structure. Is there a spot? Is there the place? Is there? And the answer is kind of really no. But one of the things he says is that confidence in free will is biologically adaptive, and so in at the beginning of that, I'd like to say that the leading biologist in the world says that if you believe that you have free will, that or if you have confidence in it and you can act that way, that you are in control of your emotions, you do better adapt to any circumstances that you're in. And I think that's a thing to look at. The other thing that I would say is, if it seems to me that if you do not have the primary and the secondary process emotional systems that Panksepp is producing here, or presenting here, if you do not have those in line or understood, you can see even something as outdated as Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of coming through right here. You're not going to ever have even the option to be at this free will moment. And I think anybody, whether you're religious or not, or whether you're thinking through kind of your life goals, if the goal is to have free will or to not have free will, I hope everybody would choose to kind of have free will. It doesn't seem like we want to be controlled as much as possible. But as we'll talk about, there are things that in a lot of ways happen to us, and learning about them does seem, and I hope is helpful to you. We'll continue with chapter 1 next time. I hope this has been enjoyable for you. Have a good rest of your day.